The eye line will be about here. It'll be just where you can see the furthest bank of the river about here. Okay. The eye line, of course, is exactly the same thing as the horizon line. It's just that we can't see the horizon through the trees. So I would say we need to do something about that because it divides the painting 50-50 that, 50% below. So that's my first adjustment. So 50 is about here. I'm going to take it up to, you don't have to go too high, about there. Now, if you're struggling to make horizontal lines like I just did, it's it'll be because you sat down. Um, if you sat down, I strongly recommend you just use a straight edge. So if you've got like a sort of old ruler to hand, just use a straight edge, because I think it's virtually impossible to do a horizontal line if you're sat down. A horizontal line that stays horizontal, that is. So this is now our eye line, okay? A little EL either side to mark that. Why is that important? Why is it important to establish the eye line? Because if you don't have a flat, a horizontal, when you get to placing the sides of your river and the embankments here, there's you might end up coming up here at an awkward angle when you get close to the viewer. Okay, not explaining this terribly well at the moment. It'll kick as we paint through. But what with water? Water is basically the flattest thing on this planet. So you've always got to remember that it is perfectly horizontal. And if you can establish a good horizontal, i.e. the eye line, any other line that you make across here is easier to do because it's parallel to the one you've made for the eye line. It'll always be parallel. Now, it does affect also, as I say, this is what I was trying to get to. The shapes of the woodland that come down to the river will go slightly up. And I think the point of, again, the turn in the river is bang in the middle of this scene. So I'm going to push this. That's no good either. You can't have it there. You need to push it over to here. So the left hand embankment, okay, is off to the left here. Trees come up here approximately like this. I'm going to take them right out into the corner here. So I'm going to exaggerate some of that scale. Okay, so if you can imagine, these are my trees, roughly speaking. Um, Now, one of the trickiest things is this. With reflections, dark shapes and reflections on water, it can be quite difficult to see exactly where the grasses of the embankment meet the water. What you want to try to avoid is having a straight line. In other words, your brain is sort of saying, well, I can see the grassy embankment about here, and from here to there, which is the turn in the river, you do a straight line. Don't do that. It doesn't do that. It won't do that. Yes, it'll go from A to B, okay, but it'll go up in like sort of staircase steps like this. It'll go up in that sort of fashion because as the um, as the embankment sort of unfolds towards us, it'll come in at horizontal. It'll always meet the water with a slight horizontal at its base, like this. So it'll go up in, as I sort of say, stages in steps like this. Now, the reflection, as you can, doesn't take a genius to work this one out, is basically a mirror, a carbon copy of what is on that embankment. So I'm doesn't have to be spot on, because with a little bit, it only takes a little bit of movement in water to change the shape of the reflection. So, but I will pencil that in. But that's the important one there. So on the left, I've decided that my embankment, my grassy bank, goes makes contact with the edge of my painting about here. Okay, so the eye line's up here. That goes through the painting up here. But my grassy bank comes out about here. Now, because the photo was obviously taken by a person who's closer to the left-hand bank. If they'd been in the middle of the river on a boat taking the photo, we would probably see this embankment go out at equi sort of horizontal level. So it would go out similarly on the right hand side, the same measurement as it goes out on the left hand side over here. But it doesn't. We're over to the left. We've taken this from the left, this photo from the left hand side. So that means the river is the river embankment, the grassy embankment, is much further away from us over here. So it goes out about there, closer to the eye line. Okay. Now from here on in, it should be pretty easy, but it is important to get that right. Now then, another thing I think I'd like to change for the sake of creating a more dynamic painting is this. Sorry, I'm filling something in over there. The bank on the right, because it's further away from us, is a little bit small. It doesn't really offer enough balance to what's going on the left-hand side of our painting. So you don't want to go crazy over here. You certainly don't want to copy this like bookends either side. Don't do that, whatever you do. But I do think that the painting will benefit for things being slightly bigger closer to us here, and then tapering off. The eye line is up here, we said. So the land behind goes out. So the land behind that we can see must be above the eye line, okay? That's why we can't see the horizon. So it's about there, something like that. Make a broken, staggered line there. Don't spend too much time. Just approximate it for now. Remember, pencil can always be erased afterwards. So again, the effects that I mentioned about staggering in a sort of stepped way is less obvious over here because it's further away from us, but it will still be there. So I'm going to bring this line. This is my embankment line where it meets the water, roughly speaking. It should have a mostly horizontal look to it. But here, just where I've stopped my pencil, is the nearest tree or bush that comes in and reaches the river. I've got it a little bit low, actually, I think. I'm going to take it up. So there's my first adjustment. Take it up much closer to the eye line. So it's quite a shallow, angle from there to there. Let's erase that. And this is what sketching does for you. This is why sketching is so helpful. Usually when you've put in a pencil mark here and a pencil mark there, a line here, a line there, you will just intuitively feel that's wrong. Okay, that seems much better now. Then I do one more check and I say, well, if the water's horizontal, okay, is that side a little bit low? Possibly, but it's not a million miles out. So I'll just be a little bit careful around here. I'll just leave that option open. I know it's in this area somewhere. So this is just to make this perfectly clear. Where my pencil is here is where the river meets the grassy bank. If I take it up to here, that's where the water meets the grassy bank. Take it further, that's where the water meets the grassy bank. Take it further, that's where the water meets the grassy bank. So everything in this envelope, this shape here, is reflection. Okay. Here's an interesting thing. I think we brought it up last week or very recently in another session. Um, if you look at what reflections, if you've got a lightish coloured bush or tree, its reflection will appear darker. Okay, and we've got that proof on the right hand side here. On my paint, on my photo, sorry, that's a sort of the color's dull because of this. It's silhouetted, but it's a sort of green, um, a greenish yellow. But look at how much darker the reflection is of that bush. It's probably bay willow or one of these species. So it is a sort of greeny yellow, but its reflection is much darker. And do remember, folks, don't get confused between reflections and shadows. They are different things. It's easy to confuse them and think, well, that's the shadow of the tree, of this bush. It's not. It's the reflection. And as I say, reflections of light things. This is a rule of thumb, but it's fairly reliable. Something light will reflect darker than it actually is. And the opposite is also true. So if you get a really, really dark tree, its reflection is often a bit lighter. It's an odd, quirky thing, but that's you only have to go out next time you're out near a river and you've got a calmish water surface like we have here. Study that. You can make little notes. So there we are. I think we're ready to go. I'm going to just remind myself exactly where the edge of that reflection is. You might hear me refer to it as a shadow, folks, and that's just me not really being bad teacher, not thinking what I'm doing. So these are reflections. We will put shadows in, a little bit of shadow in towards the end of the painting, but I think it's quite nice to put that steeple, that church steeple in. It barely registers in the photo. You could easily miss it. But I think, wouldn't it be nice just to include it in here? But just as we avoided putting the turn of the river, the furthest part of the river that we see, in the middle, because that's where it was, we shifted it to the left. That church spire is potentially a bit close to the middle measurement. So I'm just going to take it to about here. So just pencil it in very lightly. As I say, with the loose style, if anybody, I always say to anybody, if you still feel like you're a newcomer to the loose style, um, try to rely on the paint doing most of the important stuff for you, and use the pencil only to give you guidelines. So because we won't want a hard edge on something that far away, so we'll rely on the paint to put that in. Okay, time to get some paint going. Um, Something I haven't mentioned is, apart from the main mass of reflection here, we've got the added reflection of the trees, the upper stretches of the trees, the canopy. And again, I don't think you really have to put in every limb and branch and twig. It's just, you just need to sort of remind yourself you need to put those in. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a trusty old favorite here, my 1 inch 1 inch wash brush. It's a badger hair thing. Haven't used it for a while. I've been tending to use um, other 1 inch wash brushes like this, and they're both good. Either you can use any one of these. It's whatever you get most comfortable with. And my one tip in that respect is to stick with one brush for as long as possible until you get really used to it. Then branch out and try other brushes. Right, I'm just cleaning my palette off a little bit here because I want some warm color in here. And at the moment, I've got this mucky gray blue stuff from another painting. The colors that I'm going to start with are Oh, this is worth mentioning. You know, we've all seen this trick of if you want to put a little sun to infer that the sun is just on the horizon there. I mean, by all means, do so. You can. There are several ways. There are many ways of doing it by device, and that is to you can buy these little white sticky. Um, Circles from the stationers, you can put that on and leave it on while you do the paint, and then take it off and then drop a bit of color in. Or you can put the color on, speed dry that, put your little circular dot on it, and remove it at the end. There's several ways of doing it. I'm not keen on things like that. It's just me, but if you choose to do it, folks, you won't get any. I won't say a word. It's each to their own, I think, with things like that. Um, I'd prefer to sort of intensify an area with the color that we want. And the colors that I'm going to start with is the warm color. So unlike a traditional color watercolor painting, we'd probably start at the sky here, and move down. So I'd start with blue and then warm it up as I come down. I'm starting with, I want to really get this lovely warm peachy color in. So I'll go a little bit quiet for a minute now because I'll be just getting things going. So I'm picking up a bit of cadmium yellow, a little bit of alizarin crimson. So as I say, the color, the target that you're looking for here is like a peach, a really rich peachy color. And don't be mean with this paint. Um, just make sure that you give it and go over the. Don't be afraid to go over the land. Don't be precious about the land mass. Paint over it, okay? Here it is. I'll go straight across from one. So I'm really applying that just above the eye line. The bottom edge of that paint there sits on the eye line. Doesn't matter if it drifts forward. In fact, it'll have to drift forward to come into into the river. So there it goes. As I say, it'll appear and reflect in all sorts of different places, but it's a good idea to have it nice and strong in the first place. Now then, you've got to quickly get at this line. And people say, do you have to paint quickly? I'm afraid you do for some things, not for the entire process of the painting from start to finish, but in these initial stages where shapes have got to be made without any hard lines to them, you have to move quickly because slowness creates horrible hard lines. You'll end up with a hard line between your blue and your orange. So I'm cleaning the brush rapidly here, and I'm picking up some cerulean blue and some ultramarine blue. And I'm very quick to get in with at the top, okay? So there, stay at the top for a moment. Don't whatever you do, don't start pulling the blue down into the yellow area. Just sit. This is so there was a quick, it was a quick reaction, if you like, to get in against this warm color. But as soon as you've got in there, you can relax. And what I'm doing now is I'm just getting the brush back to something with less water in it, and I'll pick up a tiny amount of paint, and we'll take a small amount of, let me just show you, take a small amount of alizarin crimson to the blue, and that'll give us the clouds. Probably over here. It's all about the minimum contact with the paper, or being economic with your brushwork, if you like. Okay, if I were to keep going back and forth here because oh, that I could make that look better, or I could make that little cloud look, but don't, you won't make it look better, you'll actually spoil it. So it'll do its own thing as long as you get the water paint ratio in the brush loading correct, then it will paint it for you. Which brings me on to something, while I just sort of take a little respite here. I must get actually. I must get into the water for a moment. So I'm scrubbing against this yellow edge lots of water. There's barely any paint in this brush at the moment. So, if you're not sure how to tackle this, thing to do is this: land your brush with the paint in it here, nowhere near this color. Land it here into the open area of water, and pull from right to left into the edge of your yellow, into this warm sunny color. Have to do the same over here for now before we can get a chance to um, paint this area, but I'm more or less doing the same thing. Oh, look, until I haven't used this brush for a while, the handle's starting to disintegrate. It's just the varnish coming off. So I'm just putting this blue in here because it's mainly because I'm just changing the tonal value of this area. That's all. It's not about the fact that it's blue. It's about the fact that it's a change of tonal value. So I'm pushing now, if you look, I'm pushing this brush up into the area that is the embankment, the grassy riverbank. Now I can also do that along here. And we will soon have to down tools, or at least I will have to speed dry this, sorry. I'm just going to take that slightly greenier blue that I've got in the brush now across the lower part of the water there. And we'll leave that to dry of its own accord. Now then, here's a word of warning. I've watch what I do a second. I have at the top of my painting some water coming in from the edge of my masking tape. Now that happens a lot when you're using big washes. It can come in from the side, from the bottom, as it is here, from the top. You should just carefully take a tissue and wipe that to stop that leaching any further. It's no great disaster if it does happen, because it catches you out usually because you're so sort of engrossed in what you're doing elsewhere in the painting that this nasty little thing is happening at the top of your painting. But don't try fixing it now. That's the thing. Don't think, oh, I better go in there and put the brush over it and clear it. That's definitely not the thing to do. Just let it do what it's going to do. Let it dry, let it turn. It's basically a cauliflower. Let it turn into the cauliflower, and when it's bone dry, when it's completely dry, maybe even right at the end of the painting, we can then we can go over that with a fresh wash. Okay, I'm going to speed dry this so that we can move to the next level. So I mentioned the thing about three stages of a watercolor painting, and this is worth mentioning definitely, and that is when we're learning to paint the loose style, the hardest thing you'll have to learn, well, there's a number of quite difficult things you have to learn if you're used to painting tight, but this is one of the hardest things. That is not to look for anything that resembles anything recognizable at this stage. It shouldn't. It should look like an abstract painting, or very close to an abstract painting. Don't start looking to put in branches, trees, uh, any detail whatsoever. Just avoid it, because what will happen is if you do that at stage one, and we have just reached the end of stage one. If you do that at stage one, you inevitably by the time you get to the end of the painting, the end of stage three, you say to yourself, well, now's the time to put detail in, and you just load it up with even more detail. And it's no wonder that our paintings look overworked. And the interesting thing is, I think we always sort of say, well, we overworked it at the end. We didn't actually. We overworked it in the first stage. much earlier in the process. So keep everything to just a basic shape. Okay. Bear with me a second while I speed dry this. Just running my hand over it now. Um, it's not, it won't be bone dry, but it's certainly dry enough for me to take us on to the second stage. Right. And now this is where I'm going to change brush. And I'm going to use this stage, I'm going to use my mop brush, okay, a squirrel mop. Now, some of you, I know some of you will not have a mop brush. So an ordinary round brush, you know, what we call it, a standard round brush is perfectly okay as well. But you want to keep your brush sizes as large as possible for the loose style, okay? Um, because you will, with a smaller brush, you'll be there ages and you'll make lots of very small marks and probably give texture to areas where you shouldn't be texture. That's what a small brush does. If you're um, if you're painting certain areas with a small brush, there'll be a lot of small marks showing, and for that distance, that's too much texture. And this is why we should always use as big a brush as we can. So mop brushes perform slightly different to standard round brushes. Okay, um, the mop brush holds a lot more. I know this is a slightly larger brush than that one, but size for size, mop brushes hold a lot more than ordinary standard round brushes. Um, the the sable brushes hold quite a bit, but if you're using a synthetic one, then they don't hold very much. And one thing that is really useful when you're painting the loose style is continuity and speed. So you don't want to be loading the brush every couple of seconds because that brush has only managed to deliver some paint about there. You really want a load that takes you right away across here with one loading, with one delivery. So the color I'm using here, take a little bit of the Payne's Grey and a little bit of the Viridian Green, and then a little bit of raw sienna. Just show you what that was. I've got too much raw sienna in this mix at the moment. So I'm going to use this well here. That's the beauty of having a large mixing area. If you get it wrong, you can just change to this one here. So that was Payne's Grey. You can follow this, of course, on the video when you get it. But that was Payne's Grey, a little bit of ultramarine blue, and some raw sienna. And I want it to be a cool green. Bit more grey. As I'm sure you, well, I know most of you know, folks, colors sort of, they pale off and weaken the further we go down, further away from us. Now, what you've got to be careful of in photographs is that even though this is a silhouette, and yes, even the distance areas will be darker than normal, and if it was a daytime, you can imagine if this was a daytime scene, okay, the sun would be above us, therefore light would be reflecting onto the water, and that light would be reflecting onto the trees and the grassy banks, making them much lighter. But because this is that particular time of day, that sun is down, so everything is slightly darker than it would normally be. So I'm just testing here, if I'm honest. I'm just, see how this brush, it hasn't even delivered half of its load yet. This brush is great, just keeps going. Whereas a round brush, a synthetic brush, would have run out by about there, from there to there. So into this. Now, when I get to this tree, we noted earlier that it was slightly yellow. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of cadmium yellow for this nearer tree here. And we decided that its bottom, the bottom where it came out of the ground, was just about here. So it's below, can you see, it's just below the eye line there. The eye line is where my brush handle is pointing to there. So it's just below. Push up, push a brush. Don't always pull a paintbrush. Push it out to the edge. Make your edges by pushing out. But don't do that for the other trees because, again, just like color, shapes are more defined at their edge the closer they are. Now, before this has a chance to dry out, I'm going to pick up a bit of Payne's grey. So there's the colors I've been working with. A greeny cold grey here, sorry, a grey green here, and a warm green there. But then I'm just going to pick up a little bit more of the Payne's grey, a little bit of alizarin crimson into this grey. And that's just going to establish some slightly darker areas. For instance, about here at the base of these trees. I wouldn't take this dark beyond about where my finger is there because I just don't think it'll be that dark. Even though the photo might say differently, I don't think you'll get that sense of distance if you make this area here as dark as this area here. So underneath this tree, things get bigger. The dark shape gets bigger, of course, because it's overall it's bigger. Now I'm going to paint in some of the reflection with the same mix. Remember we said the reflection was darker than the actual plant itself, the tree itself. So I'm adding a little bit more of the three dark colors. The blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, viridian if you like. That should be okay. I'm going to leave a little slither of light, even though I can't really see that in the photo. I'm going to leave a little fillet of light there at the base of that tree because its reflection comes into the water something like this. It needs warming up. As soon as I did that, I could see it needs warming up. So I'm going to use a little bit of burnt sienna in this reflection. So not only is it darker than the tree itself, it's also warmer. Then it does this. Remember, the point of my brush here is making ripples at the edge of the shadow. Okay, just nice quick flicks of the brush. And then with a lot more water in this brush, I've just dunked my brush in the in my water tub, and I'm going to take this reflection further down the river, and it does something of a job to look like what it's actually reflecting. Notice I've left a slither of almost unpainted paper between the riverbank and the reflection in the water. That helps the eye to read it, that it keeps the dark thing flat and horizontal, which we will read as a reflection. But the divide, the little marginal sort of light area tells the brain that there's a change of angle there. Okay. So do I need to come in about here somewhere, almost coupling up with this nearer dark? Yeah, I think I do. So I'm just coupling into that there. Okay, I'm going to do this side. Oh yeah, I mentioned the fingernail trick. If you want to infer a little bit of texture here in the nearer trees and shrubs, I'm just going to use a fingernail. Don't get too carried away with this. It's all you're doing is texturizing, whatever the adjective is. That should be sufficient, I think. Now, what we could do while this is still damp, we could say this requires that sunshine. So if you take that lovely warm color that we used in the sky, we could put a little bit of that on this side of the tree. Okay, and that's saying that it's catching, reflecting the light there. Okay, right. Now, here's my here's my wash brush again, the one I started with, and I'm cleaning it as we speak. And I know that if I drag, if I make contact very, very carefully with that still wet reflection here, I'll just drag some vertical vertical lines down. So I'm borrowing the paint from that delivered um, reflection that I put in there. And just if you do it, when you're doing this, sorry, you really need to be. As I say again, it's one of those moments where I could not do this sat down. I can only do this stood up. If you can do it sat down, folks, then good on you. I've tried over the years, and I can't do it. If if I have to sit down, I get a bad back from time to time. If I have to sit down to do this, what I tend to do is always have it worked, have the board for this particular thing held up with one hand, held up almost vertical to my face at arm's length, and keep my right arm straight. That's the only way you can get a perfectly vertical brushstroke. And they do have to. That one wasn't, but they do have to be vertical. There's no good them going off to the right, going off to the left. Right, back to the left-hand side. And I think when we get to this left-hand side, we'll call that stage two, the end of stage two. So it's much the same. So I'm going to speed through this because all I'm going to do on the left-hand side is the same as I just did for this first right-hand side. So ultramarine blue, a little bit of viridian, raw sienna, Payne's grey, nice dark cool green. And this is really this is off the belly of the brush. It's not the point of the brush. These shapes are far too big to be spending your time with the point of the brush doing this. This is the belly of the brush pushing down, actually pushing down into the paper like this. And so as I go towards this little peninsula, if you can call it that, I do turn to the point of the brush. But for the mass here, it's off the belly. Just push the brush into the paper. Point of the brush, belly of the brush for the big area. Now, I'm also painting the reflection at the same time, and this is another way you can do things. So, whereas it's sort of you can see on the right hand side where the shrub meets the water, but over here it's far more difficult. So I'm just going to say that area you can't see that well where the sorry, the grassy bank reaches the water. But what I will have to infer it, and I'm going to do that in a moment, just make sure I've got the colors and the tonal value right over here. So something like this. Remember I sketched out the edge of my reflections about here somewhere. So where is that, where does this grassy bank land? I said it was about here because I made a little pencil mark at the edge of my paper. So it comes in from the side maybe, like this, and it staggers up. Like something like this. Try to avoid a perfect, it's not a staircase, so these shrubs grow in a rather random fashion. So you don't want to be making it look like these are, set out in a regimented step-like fashion. I think that's okay. That would suggest that the water comes across here, something like this. There we are. Now, again, I think it's important to texture somehow. And there's several ways. I've shown you one way over here with my fingernails. Um, Credit card, a little bit of texture. Um, but another favorite way of mine is to, if you take your small brush, your size 7 round, dunk it in water, and just tap a little bit of water droplets onto that fresh paint, you will get, I could do a bit over there actually, you will get something akin to like a shrubby texture, the texture of a shrub. So, okay, I think one, I think we, sorry, before I do that, we must do that same, um, a little bit of pulling down of the reflection vertically like this. Not too much, it's just to soften areas. We'll paint the harder reflections of the trees themselves and their tree trunks on dry in stage 3. Okay. Now I'm reading this, and it's not right at the moment. I'm reading this. See the water level here. Let me just point this out to you folks. The water level under my right-hand side tree suggests that if you chase that, if you follow that across, you've got to establish the fact that when it reaches this bank over here, that it's at the same height. So I'm just taking out with a thirsty brush a little bit of paint, and that will give us that nice one side matching the other. You know, it's so easy. I've seen it in so many paintings where you paint a river scene like this, and it's as though the river is doing that. The surface of the river is doing that. It can't do that, of course. It has to be horizontal. So check these things as you go. Always have an eye out for these potential um, things going astray. So don't do too much of what I'm doing here. I'm only doing that to make sure I don't lose that, the way that that is read. So similarly, if the water level just off this edge of this reflection comes across, you'd expect that bank to go in a bit there. So I came too low, didn't I? You know, I came this way, a little bit too far this way. For this to meet there on a horizontal, then that should be up here. This what I'm taking out here is where the water meets the bank. About there. Okay, that's better. Yeah, as I said, I'm just going to do one more thing to this painting. Oh, I should put the church in, and that'll just be uh, a little bit of very weak cerulean blue and some very weak raw sienna. And let's pointy brush, but this is about as detailed as I like to get. Notice that, oops, let me just finish that spire. It's going a little bit horrible there. Let me just get the top off. Just put that right a second. So what I was going to say was this. Notice that I don't take the paint right down and make contact with the trees. And that's simply because it wouldn't really appear like that, even if the photo says so. It looks much better if you if you if you hover that shape over the top of those of the woodland, because light will still be bleaching out the tops of shapes there, and you would get a separation, and it looks better. It looks better. Okay. Could it be a bit warmer? I'm looking at that church spire and I'm thinking yes, it's catching sunlight, but yet also this side of that we see is of course out of the light, isn't it? So it's probably going to be more neutral color than it is local color. Let's make it a bit weaker. Leslie, I'm fiddling. Stop fiddling. Okay. Right, put a couple of trees in, and I think we'll take a little break. We'll have a chat. I'll stick with this round brush for the moment. And the tree trunks of color mix is raw sienna, Payne's grey, with a little bit of, what's that color called? Alizarin crimson. And I'm just going to place a couple of these nearer trees in, and then I'll turn to a rigger brush to do the others. So that's enough with the round brush. So this is a case of you need to match the size of the thing you're painting to the brush. I mean, you know, you can get a really fine line from this, but why make an already difficult job even more difficult? So I'm just going to use a rigger brush for the others because they'll appear smaller and thinner. So here we go. Much easier with the rigger brush. I can even do some slightly lighter branches on these nearer trees. Just getting some ideas from the photo. And that's it. The photo's just there for ideas. For the most part anyway. I'm using it to get the shape of these particular trees. So once you've scumbled in, this is quite a dry brush mix, by the way, okay? And if you flick across the surface very quickly, you'll get exactly the right type of brush mark. That is a dry, it's as though there isn't, it looks like you're using dry brush when you're not. It's just the fact that you're skimming over the surface so quickly that it delivers a dry brush type deposit. So a little bit of water, and off the belly of this brush, here's an interesting thing, okay? Because the light is in reverse from a daytime, the tops of the trees you need to hint upon a shadow. So there'll be a sort of a bluier cast to the top of the trees. Whereas, as you see now, if I pick up a little bit of burnt sienna, a warm color, and put that underneath here, that tells us that the sunlight is coming up from underneath these shapes. It's hitting the underside of these trees, okay? And that is total reverse and opposite to daytime scene, okay? Where the warmth would be on top of the foliage, on the top of the tree, and the shadow bits would be underneath. So is this interesting enough? I'm just scumbling. A lot of people don't, I think, push their brushes to discover what a brush can do completely. This rigger brush is great for doing rigging and lines, as you've just seen. I did the branches in the trees, but it's also great for this too. You just push it down on its belly and it gives you a fantastic delivery of loose looking foliage. Okay, I think really we're done with stage 2. Okay, stage 3. Let's make sure you can all hear me. Stage 3. So let's deal with the lifting out of some of this area back here, because it's very flat looking. If I don't know how well that carries across. So I'm just going to take my 6 or 7 round brush. I'm just going to, with a damp little bit of water in that brush, just going to agitate some areas. Right, so I'm just taking out a bit more of this and paling off the area. And this has the effect of this particular stretch of woodland looking a bit further away. Probably only need to do it, no further than here. What I'm going to do is put a little bit of color into this. So I've taken a little bit of water on the brush, lifted some paint out, and I'll just put a little bit of warmth. That is a little bit of raw sienna into that area there. So that's better. That does sort of give us the effect of things moving away from us a bit more. Right, okay. I'm now going to put in some, I'd sort of say little floating debris, bits of flotsam and jetsam. And while I'm at it, I'll put these reflections of the trees in. I'm going to use the rigger brush for this. Ultramarine blue, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, and a little bit of the viridian green. And it doesn't have to be perfect, folks. You don't have to start sort of thinking, well, there's a tree limb here. It's got to be a direct copy. It really doesn't. Water, even in this fairly calm water, will move around sufficiently enough for us to not have to worry about that direct, accurate reflection. But they are considerably darker if you see. Now they will pale off as the reflections go further down. So a little bit of water in here. We're very nearly there, aren't we? I mean, stage 3 is just about dotting the I's, crossing the T's. So just as I did, I mean, it's no different to how I actually painted the trees themselves. With the belly of this brush, I'll put the reflections in a little bit softer though, off the belly of the rigger brush like this. And take them out as they appear in the photo. Actually, the shapes disappear out of, and that's quite important. You must take your trees out beyond the edge of your paper up here, okay? Life goes on beyond this piece of paper. We're supposed to be trying to convince our viewers that, this is real. So in the real world, we wouldn't get this weird sort of squeezing everything within the confines of the edges of our paper. So always make sure nearer trees. It does, of course, depend, I should say, on how close and how big the trees are. A small tree is never going to sort of disappear out the top of the paper, but an average, whatever these are, lime trees, poplars, whatever they are, they're big enough and should go out of the scene here, and in reverse, the same will happen in the bottom of the paper. That really brings depth. If you restrict everything to within the confines of the paper, it does tend to look a little bit artificial. Now, I'm going to put a little bit of I'm going to tap a little bit of texture on top of this tree over here. It's a bit flat looking for my liking. So this is a round brush with plenty of water. The mix I'm using is the same mix as I just used over here. Tap a little bit of texture into here, a little bit of texture over here. I think with a little bit of suggestion of things floating in, even though the river itself in the photo looks fairly clean on the surface. It's quite nice to suggest something floating. And if you want to put ducks, as I know stretches the Taff is like any other stretch of river, it'll have mallard and various species on it. What I'm doing here is I'm taking some sticky ultramarine blue and some sticky burnt sienna. And this is one little trick I use. It works for me anyway. I put a tiny little dot. Don't put a head on it. Don't start thinking it's got feathers and it's got wings. It's just a little lozenge shape. Sits slightly horizontal to the surface. Could be a coot, mallard, whatever. Give it some friends. Some of them almost touching. One off on its own over here. Another one behind slightly. Let's bring one slightly closer to us, perhaps about here. So scale it up slightly. If you get that close, then you could put a little nick at one end, and that will suggest perhaps the bird's head and neck. Okay, but you're going to be really careful with that. It's usually sufficient just to put a sort of lozenge shape in. Now, what I do is I take an index finger, dry, and before that paint gets a chance to dry completely, I just pull the paint down from it like this, and that little duck gets its own reflection very easily. So, one a bit closer again. Let's put some on the opposite side of the river over here. Not too many. I'm just suddenly thinking, you'll get carried away if you're not careful. So that looks like we've got a little bit of life in the water. I'm going to spatter the surface of the river here, right down here in the foreground. For the same reason, it needs breaking up. You can have too much of a bare area. Bare areas, quiet areas are really good, of course, because it brings balance. You do need a little bit of texture in the foreground. So there we are. That's as though there's a little bit of movement in the river. I still don't like this, if I'm perfectly honest. So what I'm going to do is, it's too, to me, it's too colorful. I think I've got to gray it down. So I'm going to take some cerulean blue and some of the mix that I used in the shadow over here, which was Viridian burnt sienna. And I'm just want it to look cooler, I think, and different. Okay. Now, for my final part of this, I'm just going to put on some shadow. So this is ultramarine blue. Not much shadow. It's just to make sure that we're getting a sort of silhouette effect. This is ultramarine blue, a little bit of alizarin crimson. And I will sort of say, well, areas of this look to be a little bit darker in areas, shaped out by shadow. Just remember this: shadow, when it falls on organic things like these hedgerows and grassy banks, will be soft of edge. It's not like these shadows are falling on walls of houses where the edges would be really hard. So what I do is I sort of make a pattern like this. Don't go too far down here, because it wouldn't be much evidence of shadow down here. Sorry, I make a pattern like this, and I'll push my thumb or finger into the edges of that shadow shape, just to soften things off. A little bit more blue in here. Ultramarine blue, that is. I'm just putting a little bit of shadow over here. suddenly, oh, it nearly went quiet. So there's my shadow. I'm going to pick up a little bit of white now and put in some highlights across the surface of the water. And that will be a little bit of white, a little bit of really dark linear stuff with some sticky dry paint mix. So what I do with this, I just take the gouache, or Chinese white in this case, it's whatever generally speaking, it's whatever I pick up first. Rig a brush straight into the neck of the paint, straight into the tube of the paint, okay? And I'll look for areas where I think the light might just be picking up the top of the water. Always good against the dark over here, of course. That's always going to work, always going to look good. There's another opportunity, what we were saying earlier, Chris, and I said, you know, when you're looking across the river from one side to the other, if there's a horizontal line here at that marker point, at that distance, then take your line horizontally across your river surface and put that line in on the opposite bank here. So just a bit here, so the, excuse me, so the horizontal, I think, will come across here. So the water surface will still be about here. The flatness of that surface is about here, going into the bank. That's much better now. Now I'm going to spatter because I always do. There are always airborne things in our environment, and we might not always be conscious of them when we're out and about on our walks and things, but there's something about if you put them in, there's something that says, wow, what is it about this painting makes me feel like I'm there? It's the subtle things. It's like this. It's the airborne seed heads, insects, whatever it is. It just adds a little bit of real life, or reality, if you like, to your loose style work. I'm still struggling a little bit with some of those trees and embankments. So let me just finish this painting and I'll give that my last thoughts. So putting the white down, done with the white. Let's get a little bit of, just as I did with the white a moment ago, I'm going to do with dark. Ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. There it is. I'll do this with a bigger brush because I'm working a little bit closer to myself here. And as I say, what I'm doing now really helps to establish the flatness as long as you can make these horizontal. It's no good going across here. If you only need to go downwards slightly or up slightly, and you've lost the effect of flat water. So let's put something about here, slightly bigger because it's closer to us. So these could be ripples, whatever, but what they're really doing for us is indicating that we're looking at water, flat water. And a little bit of darkness now. So I'm reading things as I finish, as I round up. I see that this area down here at the bottom of my painting needs a little bit of weight to it, a bit of darkness. So here we go. Dry brush. So I didn't overload, didn't put too much water in that brush. It was just to give me the effects of sparkling water. And be very careful when you adjust this. I'm just softening it at the top edge there and maybe at the edge over here and a little bit down here. But other than that, it's as is, as you did it with the first brush stroke. As I say, I just want to scrub a little. These look too tight to me. So I've just taken a round brush here with some water in, and I'm scrubbing these backs. They don't look so tight. It's a little too perfect. I think we're there really. Break off the top of this shape a little bit because its hard edges really seem to sort of look a little wrong. So there. Right, let's get the mount on this painting and see what we've got.